Hi, welcome to our webinar, Rural Communities, Walkability, and Quality of Life. I'm Mike McGinn, Executive Director of America Walks, and I'm really excited by this webinar. People often have the misconception that walkability is an urban thing, but the reality is that in rural and suburban areas, there's often in the heart of the community a traditional main street and even a small street grid built around people moving under their own power, with local shops and services, churches, maybe even a theater. Civic institutions like town halls, libraries, the post office, apartments or offices in the upper stories of the Main Street buildings, a park, plaza, the street hosts the parade. It's a real community gathering place. And we've rediscovered these and called them mixed use neighborhoods, but it's actually a very traditional thing that we've neglected. In fact, they face a lot of threats. The big box stores that takes the business away from the small local businesses, or the main street that was redesigned to move traffic through fast instead of to support the people that are there going about their business and connecting with each other. So I'm really excited about this webinar because we have folks here from Main Street America, which is a fabulous organization, which is composed of hundreds of local Main Street organizations that are working to revitalize these traditional community places for all the values they bring to a community. And I'll introduce them in a second. First, I want to introduce our sponsors, and in particular, the Centers for Disease Control. Active People, Healthy Nation program supports this because of the health benefits of walkability. Americans don't get enough physical activity, and it is the antidote to chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes. And the more physical activity people get, the healthier they'll be. We'll save lots of money as a nation and as communities. We'll have a better quality of life. And how we build our places. If we build them to be more walkable, we know that people get healthier as a result of those things. So big thank you to them, as well as General Motors and Tool, which support us for the safety and quality of life that we try to bring to all communities. Um, we also want to thank everybody who's donated to us before. We were not able to do this without your help. So please think of us in your giving so that we can bring more of these programs to you. A little housekeeping. We're going to, after the presentations, take questions from the audience, and you can do so by finding the Q&A button down in the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll track them, try to answer as many as we can here, and answer additional ones afterwards if we can't get to them here. So now to our speakers. Our first presenter will be Shane Hampton, who leads Main Street America's work on the Thriving Communities program funded by USDOT, which provides technical assistance to rural and tribal communities to advance local projects. Stephanie Mitchell is a lifelong resident of Westville, Oklahoma, and a passionate advocate for rural revitalization, and you'll hear all about her efforts in her community of Westville, where she's on the town council. And we really love to not just talk about the big policy ideas, but share the case studies with you. And Stephanie will share the Westville case study with you. And finally, Amy Miller is a program officer with Main Street America, experienced in building a community, developing and implementing strategic plans, volunteer management, and the types of community engagement strategies you need to win these changes. And she's going to focus on some of the great work that's been done in Elgin, Texas. So with that, thank you for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Shane Hampton.
Good afternoon. Can you see my slides okay? All right. Well, thanks, Mike, for having us today. My name is Shane Hampton. I'm with Main Street America. And today I want to share a little bit more about Main Street and tell you a little bit about what I've learned from working with rural communities about pursuing walkability, but really want to feature the two stories that Stephanie and Amy have to share with us because they show how a rural walkability champion can really make a difference in their community. So you may know Main Street America as the movement around an approach to revitalizing historic downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts. We have about 1,600 communities participating in our program across the country. That allows Main Street to kind of learn from what's going on the ground at the very local level, to understand what trends the local advocates are focused on, and what ways they're able to make progress. We also work on some special projects that allow us to dive deeper into issues that are of big concern to local Main Street managers. And one of those is transportation. And so a couple years ago, through the U.S. Department of Transportation, we were able to take on work as a capacity builder in the Thriving Communities program. We worked with USDOT to support these 20 communities across the country developing transportation initiatives related to their community's goals. We have learned so much from that work. And one thing that's probably familiar to a lot of folks on this call is that getting, just the infrastructure is one thing, that is challenging about pursuing walkability, but also getting the right land use patterns and getting the right community sentiment to support the development of walkability is hard anywhere. But I think it can be even harder in rural places for a couple of reasons. And when we surveyed our cohort from the Thriving Communities program, we found that some of those were, they're just further away from access to the workforce for planning and design and construction to pursue literal physical projects. Sometimes they have greater distances or remoteness that adds costs to projects. And often rural places are located in areas where they may have economic hardships in their region that have led to, fiscal trouble with the local government being able to, even afford to maintain or build new infrastructure. But even with all those challenges, of course, people in rural places are out there doing it and getting it done. And I love what Mike said to open this up. We think there's this huge divide between what makes an urban place and what makes a rural place. But what I've found is that many rural places are set up with the bones to support walkability, much more like a walkable urban neighborhood than they are like many of today's contemporary suburban neighborhoods. So, in a lot of ways, in a small town with a main street setup, the interventions we need to pursue around walkability might be a little bit more straightforward than in a contemporary area where land uses are very, very separated and there are big multi-lane thoroughfares with limited access that are troublesome for safety. The second component to this, besides kind of the how, is the why. And I think, again, rural places want to pursue walkability for the same reasons anyone else does. They have extreme health disparities in rural places and may have an interest in doing something for the community to improve that. Safety issues, access to jobs, access to healthcare, education can be challenging in rural areas. But there's also a positive vision that rural places have for their future, and they see a role for walkability in that. They see walkability as part of their economic development strategy, part of their strategy to welcome tourists into their community, and for their own residents, maybe a way of celebrating a new quality of life or enhancing social ties in the community. Main Street, like I said, has learned so much from its network. And one resource you can check out is our Navigating Main Streets as Places guide, which talks more about Kalispell, Montana, who's centered a multi-purpose trail as part of their downtown revitalization, or Hendersonville, North Carolina, that has this really cool, distinctive serpentine design to their Main Street. So we can learn a lot from seeing what all of these main streets have done to promote great, comfortable walkability downtown. Through my work on TCP program, we've also seen some great creativity. I love what Independence Oregon did, working with the Oregon Department of Transportation to test out mid-block crosswalk on their state highway and then collect data. They found over 700 people crossing at this temporary test crosswalk. They can use that data to go and make their case for permanent improvements. Up in northern Wisconsin, the Forest County Potawatomi tribe has been building these beautiful multi-use paths on the outside of their state highway that connect the residents to the jobs and are also a beautiful place for all their visitors to explore. And Cedartown, Georgia, another TCP community, was successful in winning a Safe Streets for All grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to pursue a safety action plan It'll allow them to prioritize safety improvements that they need to make in town. Where I've often worked isn't in the land of like big high dollar federal funding. I've often worked where, kind of shovel ready means I have a shovel, my uncle has a concrete company, something like that. And we see this a lot, this kind of bootstrapping in rural places, just to try and see what we can do on our own to make quality of life better. So I love some of these examples, like Lexington, Oklahoma, with the improvised sidewalk. Love seeing the local mascot bulldog prints in their artwork as well to make it unique. I worked with Guyman, Oklahoma, and love that they had their tiger print curb extensions that they completed through a volunteer day, and those plunger bollards that they used to enhance their crosswalk around the school. And Tahlequah, Oklahoma is a community that has really invested a lot in making a comfortable downtown experience that celebrates the Cherokee culture that is part of that area. So I know people are calling from all over the country, and I'm not going to say it's easier in one place or another, but I did want to bring a couple of case studies from, the capital of big trucks and ball hitches. And so that's why I've invited Amy from Texas and Stephanie from Oklahoma to talk about their communities. I'm going to turn it over to them in just a moment, but as you're listening to their presentation, I think what's important to listen to is how they were able to find partners outside of their community to make them capable of doing something that was bigger than the small town. So finding that help and outside assistance, but also looking towards their neighbors and bringing them into the process so that they would understand the importance and build momentum of what they were doing. And I think for a lot of communities to recognize that pursuing walkability might be a generational effort and take some time. And so persistence, showing how these projects may take years of your championship to help unfold in rural places. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie Mitchell, who's a town council member from Westville, Oklahoma.
Thank you, Shane. Well, like you said, I'm Stephanie Mitchell. I'm from the town of Westville. I am a town counselor and I work on a volunteer basis. The work that I do for my town is just kind of a hobby. I do work full time at a bank as well, so have a very busy life. But I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the projects that we've started in our town. It's been a very remarkable experience for us, and nothing like this has ever happened in our town before. And so I just kind of want to share where we're at and where we're going. So a little bit about Westville. The town of Westville is very small. We have about 1,600 people. And it's funny that our name is Westville because we are as far east in Oklahoma as you could possibly get. We're about 2 miles from the Arkansas border, kind of really in the neighborhood of the Northwest Arkansas region. So we kind of have a little bit of traffic overflow from them. But we are a very disadvantaged area. 1 in 3 people live below the poverty line in Westville, and we have a high obesity rate of 45%. So we're working really hard to try to change those statistics. And so we have a theory and we have a plan. This is an aerial view of our town. You can see we're pretty small. That's our downtown area, but we think that we can break the cycles of persistent generational poverty. And we are classified by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a persistent poverty by making improvements to the infrastructure, which in turn, by improving our built environment, we hope to attract more residents to the area. And then, of course, with more residents, we hope to increase our revenue. And then with increased revenue, we think that we will have more income, more jobs, more town resources, and with more residents comes more real estate taxes, which would mean better education for our kids, which is a hand up out of the poverty that we are experiencing. You want to go to the next slide. So when we talk about how, it's just like what Shane mentioned, partnerships has been key. We were lucky enough that the Cherokee Nation had partnered with the Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust to send health educators into our community. And from there, the health educators helped us to write the Town of Westville Parks and Open Space Master Plan. We sat down at a group a table with a couple of community volunteers, and we just started dreaming about what we wanted Westville to look like and what we could do to improve our built environment. And through that process, funding has become available and all kinds of doors have opened for us. We've partnered with the University of Oklahoma Institute for Quality Communities. They've came in and done 2 community engagement events for us to really kind of help us to make sure that we're getting community feedback. We've also been recipients of the Oklahoma Department of Transportation Alternatives, that's a mouthful, program. And then we've had multiple local partnerships. I think Shane mentioned, my family member has a cement company, but we've had just local communities show up with their dump trucks and haul off, old cement, and we've had people do dirt work for us. Just the community has shown up, and anytime I need something, I know I can call on the community and they show up for us. So next slide. So really how it started and was that Hillary Mead was one of our health educators, and we started our master planning, and she came in and said, hey, so there's this funding available, and I think it would be good for you guys to practice, because eventually once you get this master plan in place, you're going to want to pursue funding. And I think we had about 2 weeks to pull it together, and we wrote a grant for us to build a splash pad through the Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust. So Shane, if you'll go to the next slide. Here's our splash pad. It was incredible for our community. Nothing had ever happened like that before, and our kids love it. We were also fortunate enough to get a really nice pavilion and improved lighting along our walking trail. And then during the feedback process with all of the work that we did, we also heard a lot of residents saying, hey, the bathrooms, we've got to work on the bathrooms. So we were able to install lighting, install doors, new interior paint, and a water filling station. So really, this was the project that really was the spark that lit the fire. This is a little bit about where our funding came from and what we've done so far with the park. So from there, we turned our attention to walkability, because when we talk about infrastructure, that's where it's at. We want to make it where people, residents have a good place to be outside. So our partnership with the University of Oklahoma Institute for Quality Communities, they came and did a 3-day community engagement session where they pulled in members of the community. We pulled in kids from the school. We pulled in stakeholders, and they wrote us a plan. One of the plans was for us to build a town square in that vacant lot that you can see in that photo. And then they also designed what we would do with our downtown and looked at walkability for us. So one of the recommendations that OU IQC gave us that we've really appreciated was to pursue this in a phased approach. And so we have funding for phase 1 and 2 of our town square and have pursued funding for phase 3. And then we are writing a grant currently for phase 4. So phase 1 is complete. Here's our town square. We're very proud of it. It's been a very rewarding experience, and we will be having a soft opening in May for the first phase. So, and this is a little bit of our funding for that. So most of that has been funded by TSET, and then also the Cherokee Nation and the Tom J. Edna Mae Carson Foundation were able to help us with this. So then walkability, which is what we're here to talk about today. We have a plan where we have funding now in place to connect all of our major areas, our health services, our community buildings, our prescription center. The majority of our community services will be connected through sidewalks. So this is a little bit about our funding. Each of these lines, and we'll kind of go through them, is a different phase. So the first phase that we have under construction right now is through the TSET Innovations and Built Environment Grant. And this connects the end of our town square that we're building to our public school district. And then it also finishes out the rest of Williams Street, which is our main street essentially. And then our next step, and which is currently in the planning phase, we're about 30% into the construction documents, was our Oklahoma Department of Transportation. This will connect our town park, which is where our splash pad is at, and it will head south along William Street, which is our main street, and through our historic district. And we will get streetscaping along our historic district and sidewalks on both sides to connect our town park to our town square. And then our last phase is another project through the Oklahoma Department of Transportation again, and this will connect our school district to our town park, and then it will also connect senior citizen housing, our ambulance and fire department, our medical center, back into where it connects onto the downtown, back to the first phase. So impact. This is crazy. This is a picture of me on the right. I'm in high school. I'm a senior in high school, and my friends and I. We had such foresight, but my friends and I were really concerned about our town. So we decided that we would walk around town and kind of document the buildings, and because we were concerned that they weren't going to be here anymore, and that's pretty deep thinking for an 18-year-old kid. And then fast forward 20 something years later, I purchased the building that I'm standing in front of and remodeled it and saved it. This is a 1930s cottage style Phillips 66 station. And this kind of stuff is happening all over town now. We are getting new businesses, we are getting new housing. We've had 10 to 15 new homes built, which hasn't happened since I was a kid. Our Chamber of Commerce has record participation. We have civic groups popping up all over. And not to even mention just the visible progress. People are taking pride of ownership in our town now. And it's all just because like we lit that fire of just moving forward. Then we have a whole team. We've created a strategic planning committee where local stakeholders, our school superintendent, the head of our utility authority, myself, some just local volunteers. We all sit down once a month and we work on grants to pursue further future funding opportunities. So it's been a really remarkable. And from there, I think I'll turn it on to Amy. I'm really excited for her. So thank you guys.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. I love hearing about the work that you are doing in Westville. It's very inspirational. On my part, I am going to share a case study with you from Elgin, Texas, and the work that they have been doing for the last about 28, 30 years related to walkability and downtown revitalization. So Elgin is about 12,000 in population today. It's located 19 miles east of Austin in central Texas. And it is has about 6% below the poverty line and 40% obesity. But 28 years ago, they had 16% of their population below the poverty level. And they were a much smaller community, just a little over 4,800 folks. They have seen a lot of growth happen. And the Main Street program and participating in that downtown revitalization effort has also supported overall community development and community building. So last year, they've got some statistics that we're sharing with you about their business creation success and renovation improvements, almost $3 million last year. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours support the program. Since 1990, when they became an official Main Street city, they've had almost 34 million in investment, and they have been at a 90% occupancy rate in their downtown district since 2023. And part of that is tied to the walkability efforts that they have participated in and supported over the years. So when we think about sidewalks, we've already heard some considerations of why. Why are you doing sidewalks? Why would you want to make that a priority in your community, or why would your community be interested? So one element is definitely infrastructure that supports private sector investment. You need to have access to the businesses that folks are investing in or that you are trying to retain, whether you want them to expand and grow or simply continue, in addition to any new business development you might be trying to support. And ultimately, you are building community, you're creating accessibility, and you're creating tremendous connectivity, potentially, depending on how you pursue it. So for Elgin, we saw And we can go to our next slide, Shane. This is Elgin in 1996. They had the majority of their downtown district was in poor repair, and the majority of the sidewalks where they existed were in extremely poor condition. And so from 1995 through 2023, they have worked at replacing those sidewalks downtown, but they've also worked at replacing the sidewalks to connect neighborhoods to the downtown district. So the picture on the right shows you that building renovated after the private sector invested in it. And part of the partnership in this type of development is that when the private sector looks at renovating the building and increasing those property values and bringing in business investment, they need support with infrastructure from the public sector. And so sidewalks is a great way to be able to do that in a downtown. We have our next one. Now, Elgin has, as many communities throughout the U.S., it has significant infrastructure that is tied to the Department of Transportation. And navigating highways across and beside them is part of getting around in Elgin, as in many rural communities. So when we think about the image on the left, which is a typical good luck getting there situation, we really are simply illustrating how important it is to find ways to prioritize sidewalk construction so that you are offering people safe pathways and connectivity within their community. Our next one. You also need to be providing connectivity to transit nodes when you're a community that has those. In Elgin, they participate in a rural transit system that connects them to Austin and to other communities, but you need to be able to get to those transit stops. Part of what happens with sidewalks in the community building aspect is just that you can have a lot of fun with them. And so when you walk throughout Elgin, you'll often find sidewalk chalk art and invitations to just come play on your way. Have our next one. Now, accessibility is without a doubt a huge significant point. And while we may often think about someone who is in a wheelchair, I encourage us to remember that accessibility impacts everyone, whether you are a parent taking kids in a stroller, or if you need to bring your oxygen tank with you, if you're using a walker. There are so many reasons why that 6-inch curb is going to mean the difference between somebody getting to their destination or getting to enjoy being out and about or not. So we have our next one. So for Elgin, the real critical piece throughout their planning, their efforts, was the plans. And they participated in planning processes from the early 1990s, when they were first a Main Street city, through today, where they were looking at their community and what they wanted to see in the future moving forward. So out of all of these plans, just going to talk about a couple. Stephanie mentioned using a Parks and Recreation open space master plan in her community to help facilitate this type of development happening. That was certainly true in Elgin. They also had great success with their Envision Elgin program, which looked at the community overall and the downtown, as well as simply safe routes to school plans. So those, and that's what I want to focus on for a minute. A safe routes to school plan is when you partner with your school district and your school community and look at how do we get from this school through the neighborhood or to an adjacent commercial district potentially. What route or routes do we see as the primary means of accessing the school? Those school plans can then be combined with, they can couple with the parks plan or with your overall community plans to help you begin to piece together the routes that connect your whole community, that connect a neighborhood on the southeast side of town to the downtown, to the next central neighborhood, across the highway to the western side of the community, to a further western neighborhood, all incrementally and in pieces. The other one that I want to point out here is something called a city 5-year capital improvement plan. So when communities look at all of their infrastructure projects, everything that they need to be considering from the very short term improvements they need to make in the next 3 to 5 years to long-term things that they know may not happen for 15 or 20 years. The idea of capturing those projects in one document and the city council then working with that document on an annual basis to prioritize projects to help them drive their budgetary considerations. That plan is also critically useful to local groups and staff in developing grant applications. These are all ways of helping show in your grant application efforts that you have looked at what needs to be happening and you have a level of prioritization happening. We have our next slide. So as you're developing the plans, in order for them to really be successful and for you to be successful in implementing them, you need to have really strong community engagement. And you need to be open to engaging the community in lots of different ways. So in addition to print and social media, reaching out to folks at community events, inviting them to participate while you're at the local diner for breakfast or at a coffee shop, at school events, going to where you can find people rather than necessarily expecting people to come to you will make your plan much more robust and will help you find the opportunities that you perhaps didn't think about. And so an example that I'll share for that is one of the Safe Routes to School plans that Elgin was considering had a pretty big roadblock in that acquiring the right-of-way along the perhaps first thought of route was pretty much impossible and certainly was not going to be financially feasible and wasn't going to support the timelines associated with applying for grants. But as they continued talking with the folks in the neighborhood and the students at the school and the teachers and the parents, they found a truly alternate route that was parallel to that primary road and that didn't have those right-of-way issues. And so, again, the more you engage the public, the better you're going to have your overall plan B in the long run. The next one. Now, you also, of course, are going to need to be looking at the assets that you're connecting with these sidewalks. And these things all help, again, justify to funders why building this particular route is important, why this sidewalk investment needs to happen, and why it's critically important to your community. So we look at everything from places of worship to recreation centers to various businesses. Are there medical services that folks could access more easily if they had a sidewalk route? So all of those things support stronger grant applications as well. Our next. Now, the partnerships, Stephanie mentioned partnerships in her presentation, and without a doubt, these partners they're not just going to be helping you figure out where the routes are in your community. They're also going to be helping you figure out some possible funding sources for it, additional partners that might support funding the project. They're going to be critically useful in terms of support letters, as you submit applications for funding, and oftentimes they'll bring money to the table themselves as well. So all of these entities have played a role in the overall connectivity that's been generated in Elgin over the last 30 years. Certainly the Economic Development Organization locally, they provided local match for all the projects that had connection to or were in the downtown district. The Transportation Department was a great partner over the years. Sometimes it was a grant that the city applied for that was funded through the Department of Transportation, but also the Department of Transportation participated independently, building sidewalks on their system that had been highlighted by the local planning efforts as routes that were considered a priority and were of primary concern. So there's lots of ways for the partners to help facilitate you being able to move forward and continue your incremental progress. Our next one. I would encourage everybody to think about your policy at the local level. What do you or don't you have in place that is supporting having sidewalk happen in the first place? And so when you look at subdivisions, if new developers are not required to build sidewalks on roadways adjacent to their subdivision, they simply may not do it. Some of them may, but if you don't have that as a requirement, you leave yourself open to then have to build that infrastructure yourself on the city's part. And our next one. You can also use something like the downtown zoning overlay that they put in place in Elgin to facilitate that pedestrian core, allowing a mix of uses in your downtown district, supporting more types of businesses being operational, more residential happening, allowing a greater density in that core, but continuing to maintain the safety of and the primary concern of pedestrian access in the middle of the district, so to speak. The when you use a zoning overlay to support this type of investment, again, you're supporting both the private sector and the public sector's success as they move forward. Next one. And so here's an example of the connectivity that exists in Elgin today because of their thoughtful planning and consistent applications for grants, their funding support locally, as well as generating funding partners. And so this route, this example is from the west side of the community, which is the newer subdivision area of town, 3.5 miles to the southeast side of the community. It connects a community college to an elementary school, a high school, a middle school. There are 3 parks that are accessible along the route, as well as a variety of businesses, medical services, places of worship, all the things we listed on the key assets slide earlier. And this work certainly happened with many different grants. Some of this work was done completely by the Department of Transportation. But again, all of it has happened because they thoughtfully looked ahead at where connectivity needed to happen. They acknowledged that they have major highways that divide their community, and they wanted to make those divides at least safely accessible so that you could safely cross them and safely navigate to your neighborhood down the street or to a bigger destination like the rec center. Our next one. Lots of funding opportunities and the Safe Routes to School program was rebranded, and primarily you see it today as alternative transportation. Definitely keep in mind that foundations and organizations that are concerned about health and wellness, they are great funding partners for work like this. And trail connectivity to connect subdivisions in a rural area is a great opportunity. And that's actually another policy example where a local community can work with those developers to plan for those connections, to make those connections possible. And certainly a local Main Street program is a great partner for sidewalk success as well. So our next one. And so hopefully on your part, this can be your community where you are building community and walkability at the same time, and that you have great new sidewalks to celebrate, that you can walk together, whether it's just for fun or if it's for the very functional purpose of getting to work, getting to school, getting to a doctor's appointment. That's our next one. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time today and glad to connect with folks and work with America Walks.
Thank you, Amy. And so let's get our panelists back up. Thank you all for the presentations. So a lot of questions, and so I'm going to ask everyone to be as tight as they can in the answers so we can get to more than one, because they're meaty questions and the good ones, as well as some granular ones. There's a couple of questions that I would say go to public attitudes towards walkability as versus, say, drivability. One question was about how do you deal with the community mentality that, hey, everyone has to drive and, you're not being realistic here. Another question in the same vein is, we're a Main Street business. We really need our on-street parking right in front of our business. And what you're doing is going to reduce auto mobility access to our businesses, whether it's parking or constraining street throughput or something like that. So I'll throw this one at Stephanie. Stephanie, how did you deal with that in Westville? And how did you tend to try to work to overcome those types of objections?
We did actually have some objections with that with our downtown, and it was very interesting whenever OU IQC came because they did the community engagement and talked about the downtown, and I think really it helped to shift the attitudes just by having communication with the community and like being completely transparent about our intentions. They also took into consideration design elements that would help to maintain as much parking as possible. And we were able to present that to stakeholders and downtown business owners. So it was a lot just communication, just keeping your community involved in the process and the planning, seeking their input. It's like whenever you are doing something, people want to feel like they're part of that story. And so whenever you can bring people into part of the story, then you create the buy-in for it because they feel like they're a part of it.
Shane or Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add, I love this question about, it's basically a geometry question, right? Because Main Street is a defined amount of real estate, and it's also one of the most important parts of our city that we have to generate social life and value for our businesses. And so every decision we make about how to use an inch of that right of way on Main Street is so important. But we just have to step back and think about what are our values when it comes to this? What are we making most important? And parking is a part of that equation. But I always say, if you're dealing with this, one, go count parking spots and go count how many of them are full during every busy time, because usually you'll be able to get some data that shows that nobody should be quite so scared about parking. And second is that your street doesn't have to be the same all the way through it. If folks go to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, I showed a picture of it in my slides, and just Google Drive down the main street. You'll see that they're one community with a 66-foot wide main street. It's actually the narrowest in Oklahoma. And they made the decision to give up about 16 of their parallel parking spots throughout their main street so they could create little miniature areas with a tree and a bench. And so it added that comfort, but kind of compromised with the businesses, recognizing we still want, people to be able to access by car as well.
I'm going to, by the way, I was a volunteer president of my neighborhood community council for years, and we also did lots of planning. So I just want to call out the planning processes that Amy called out. And it can be very discouraging as a person. It's like, well, this is obvious. Why can't this just change? But these planning processes are really important. And I just want to emphasize how important it is to go into those with setting what are your priorities. Because when a community has the opportunity to understand that priorities require trade-offs, you're not going to convince everybody that the parking space isn't the most important thing, but you will likely persuade others that it is not the most important thing, or deal with some of the reservations and be able to build momentum around the other priorities of safety or comfort or other ways of accessing the business. So, the bad news is there's probably going to have to be a process. The good news is you will win supporters if you're patient and thoughtful in that process to get to away from the default of the car access has to come first before anything else. Yeah. I live this stuff. The other thing, I live this stuff and still do, I guess. The other thing I really want to look at, and I think there's a question or two, a couple of questions about this, but some places have already a good core of destinations close to each other. Other places don't have it so much. So the ability to, work on the land use changes to support walkability, um, you know, thoughts on that or experiences on how important are the land use changes. And I'm kind of curious, in rural Main Street the ability to get new housing near the core as well. So you bring more people already to the walkable place to help drive change. And what are the attitudes towards trying to change land uses in rural Main Streets?
Well, so I'll jump in on the housing and encouraging housing in a downtown district. Uh, and, and again, part of the reason that something like that can be successful is because of the planning effort associated with it. So when Elgin worked on their zoning overlay, their intention was that they wanted to add housing opportunities in their downtown district. They worked with their Planning and Zoning Commission, their Historic Review Board, and their Main Street program for over a year to put together what that would look like and addressed at the same time the mixed use opportunities. It was an incredibly collaborative, community engagement oriented process. And so throughout that planning effort, as they looked at what would this look like, they were able to address the concerns that people had and the misconceptions that they had about how housing might be negative for downtown. So again, educating folks and having dynamic conversations can really go a long way. And ultimately, the overlay that they put into place has been incredibly successful for their community. It's a great model to consider.
Yeah, and we mentioned housing, but I think the other one that you called out was civic institutions as well. Do you have good examples of places that manage to get the civic investments in the core as opposed to more scattered around that people could point to in their own work?
I'll pop in there too, and then Shane and Stephanie. So Waxahachie, Texas is a great example of retaining county institutions in the downtown district and a collaborative process that actually ultimately built a parking garage to support the county services as well as the downtown's development overall. Elgin worked to retain their police department in their downtown district. Their Main Street program provided free technical design assistance to help make that happen in a very architecturally and aesthetically pleasing manner, but also to keep that activity and jobs and all that traffic happening downtown as well.
Might be, a good place to talk a little bit about the Main Street approach and the model too. The Main Street approach relies on an approach where individual is hired and manages a board of volunteers to focus and think about downtown every single day. So they are paid to think about downtown, to advocate for downtown, and to pursue whatever strategy the community has agreed upon to revitalize downtown. That means when there is a community conversation that comes up about where to build the next piece of infrastructure, there's a great community built around downtown of voices and board members and the Main Street manager who is, paid to wake up every day and think about what's best for downtown.
That's a great point, like having that organized presence. I realized that was an advertisement for Main Street America, and but an appropriate one. And I encourage people to look at their map of all of the organizations and see if there's one near you that you can engage with. And they oftentimes rely. There may be a Main Street manager, but I'm guessing they also rely on the passion of the people engaging with it to help make it work. Yeah. There's a couple of questions about federal funding. One was future funding strategies might you implement given the current federal pause on funding? And I do want to say that it is a mixed bag, but I'm really interested to hear mixed bag on whether or not there are pauses. And I'm interested to hear about any experiences that the panelists may have had in this regard. And also, how can a small community leverage the Safe Streets for All grant? A community partner of mine keeps getting their application denied due to small community size. So just generally, thoughts on still reaching for federal funding in the current environment. And again, for those of you that are those of you that are following along, there is a current Safe Streets for All application process that is open. and that also includes planning grants. In fact, they put too much money in for planning grants and not enough for implementation. But it's a great opportunity to get a planning grant started to around these things. But anyway, I'll turn it over to the Shane. Do you want to start on that one?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think my answer is related to what you just said, Mike. So if you're struggling with the Safe Streets for All program, make sure that you are applying for the planning level funding first, because there's also an implementation round of funding that can actually build safety improvements, but you really want to apply for the planning. And my overall answer to this question is kind of like, what do we do right now if less federal funding is available going forward? And that is keep planning and keep making your partnerships and reach out to your regional partners. Stephanie, I'll probably have you add to this, but your universities, your banks, your tribal governments, if you have them nearby, these can all be great partners. And you can keep working with or without financial support and major programs coming from the federal government. You may have to look at the local level, but you can keep making progress and putting yourself in a position. If federal programs do come back, they'll be competitive, and you'll be like Westville, and you'll have this track record of amazing stories to tell.
So we were a recipient of the Safe Streets for All planning grant, and it was a unique situation for us too because we are really small. The OSU, Oklahoma State University High Obesity Program, is actually who we partnered with in order to write that grant, and there were 3 participating communities. So that kind of made it where the 3 really small communities could combine and kind of band together. And then part of that partnership also was we partnered with OU IQC again, and they are doing the community engagement piece for the planning. And then we have a consultant firm that will write our safety improvement plan. So that is an idea that I would have, and recommendation is to see if there is a university partnership that you could get with, and that there are other communities that want to band together due to the size.
I want to call out the High Obesity Project. HOP is also funded by CDC to support physical activity. So just want to say that Centers for Disease Control does great work in promoting physical activity because it is the antidote to many chronic diseases for which there really isn't any other effective treatment but daily physical activity, which is why they support all of this work of us. I also would say to people on this, we mentioned Safe Streets for All. Amy mentioned TAP, formerly known as Safe Routes to School, which is federal money that comes usually through a state level decision-making process. And Shane's point about keep planning, a word that Amy kept using was projects. So plans are critical because you need a plan in order to identify projects. But once you have a project, now you can start thinking about funding sources. And projects can be funded from the federal, state, county, city level, or funded, potentially with nonprofit partners as well. But the language of politics is projects. And so if you have a project, a defined project with a cost and benefits and a list of supporters, just keep pushing, get it on the list and just keep pushing. You don't know where it will be funded at the end of the day, but if you have political support and community support for something, that's the job of the elected officials and the administrators to find the dollars at the end of the day. So just wanted to make that observation. Wish it didn't take so long to do these things. They're so obviously good. That's where all the money should flow. But it really does take building a coalition and keep pushing. And these are inspiring stories. The other question we've seen, there's kind of a series of questions, and I'm not quite sure how to approach this, but the who pays for sidewalks question, right? There's the question of there was the observation of new development should put in sidewalks. If you don't do it, you might never get it. But there's also concerns are raised that it's a burden on new housing. We see in many communities, most communities, sidewalks are the responsibility of property owners. not the public, not the public entity, but we find in these projects the public entity often pays for sidewalks. So I just, and then finally, there was a question about people encroaching on sidewalks. It's very common in places without sidewalks for local property owners to go to the edge of the street and into the public right of way where a sidewalk might go. So how do you deal with all of these conflicts about who's responsible here for these things, and how do you deal with that?
We have 4 minutes. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, yeah, we have 4 minutes. Yeah, but just any observations or thoughts on that? It is a great question. And by the way, the city of Denver passed a ballot measure making the city of Denver responsible for all sidewalks, which is kind of groundbreaking for how things work in this country. Yeah. Shane, go for it. You have some thoughts I can see.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be different from place to place and depending on the situation, essentially. So that's kind of a bad answer, but I do want to hear what Stephanie has to say.
So I can speak to encroachments because the sidewalks that we are building right now are all on city right away. So we haven't had to deal with any acquisition yet. But I know with the Transportation Alternative Program, they will help you with acquisition if you write that as part of your grant. But it's just been going and knocking on doors and just making sure that, the community knows, they're aware. And on my Delaware Street project, which would connect our town square to the school, there were very, very large trees that were in the easement. And we chose to build the sidewalks around the trees, and then if in a certain area, we just shifted sidewalks to the other side of the street because it just didn't make sense to cut down these 100-year-old oak trees so we just built around them. We did. That was the decision. So, but as for acquisition, we haven't had a whole lot of trouble. There's just been a few people that kind of get in a panic, like what's happening. And it's just making yourself available, go knock on the door. Hey, this is what's happening, heads up. We've just done a lot of that on just a grassroots level and just keeping everybody in the loop about it.
Okay, well, we are just about at the hour here, and we did not get to all of the questions, which I regret to report. We will capture these questions and see if we can answer a few of this in the final response. Excuse me, in the email we sent out after this is done. If there's more, I know that the panelists from that work at Main Street America, like me, live for these questions. They're trying to overcome them all the time. There are probably answers there. For some of the street design questions, I recommend people check out nacdo.org for some of their street design manuals about what are acceptable things to do in the street. We had questions, for example, about striping or and the like. There really are great ideas out there, but ultimately, I just say I think the panelists at this on this well. You really have to build that community support to overcome and deal with the granular objections that occur. Is really the starting point. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen again, do a little more of a close. Here we go. If you enjoyed this webinar and you want to see more of these webinars coming to you, please consider making a donation to America Walks. We really do need you. And all nonprofits are getting hit a little bit hard right now in these times. So if you like what we're doing, you want to support more of it, you want more walkable places around the country, please do so. I'd encourage you to go check out Main Street America. I just want to emphasize what Shane said about having an employee. In addition to being head of my local community council, I was also mayor of the city, and I worked with lots of the neighborhood business district leaders, and it's a critically important role, and these Main Street groups really matter, and they deserve your support as well. And I also want to call your attention to our next webinar. We already have it teed up. And our next one is talking about safer vehicles and new technology that can be used to limit the speed of vehicles and developments in state laws about addressing people with history of reckless driving, as well as cities, states that have begun using this technology in their own vehicle to prevent excessive speeding on streets, thereby increasing safety and walkability. And thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to our panelists for everything they shared. And thanks to all of our attendees for your interest in these issues and the work you do in your community. Thanks so much.